Then you have the silent years. Why silent? Because that is the time and that the Bible doesn't talk about. That is on page number 32. I have it in detail in my Bible devotional book, so I will just cover the essentials now. Silent years. That is the period between the Old and New Testament. That is the time that the Bible doesn't talk about. That is the time when the Apocrypha books were written as well, just for interest's sake. What happened during these silent years? That is from 420 to plus minus 6 BC. I like to call it decor shifts happen. A few of them. It's like, the curtain, when you go to a show, the curtain comes down and then you hear the scattering. They just shift the decor for the next scene. And then the curtain will rise again. So the curtain came down, and then God was working for 400 years behind the scene to do some decor shifts, political shifts. Alexander the Great became the world power. So from Persia, because they allowed the Israelites to go back, and then in 333 BC, Alexander the Great took over the world. Then following that, you get the Roman Empire, from Greece to Rome. That was the political shift. From the east, the power in the east, swifted to the power in the west. Cultural shifts. The Greek culture flourished. That is why the New Testament was written in Greek. I have 6 points there on the screen. Koine Greek was spoken. It was the common language of the time. Gymnasiums, theaters, stadiums, architecture, and the city of Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great, just flourished. It was a wonderful time. Greek culture flourished. The Jewish people in Alexandria wanted to translate the Old Testament, which was in Hebrew, into Greek. That's why it's called the Septuagint. So the Hebrew was translated into Greek, and the New Testament was written originally in Greek. Are you okay with that? Geographical shifts. We are still on page 32. The Jews of the scattering diaspora, where you had Jews living all over the known world of those days. There was the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. It was, I think, 27 BC up till, I think, 100 plus after Christ. There was the peace of Rome. It was easy to travel. It was safe to travel. Many Jews lived in Alexandria. They spoke Greek and worshipped in synagogues. So they didn't speak Hebrew anymore. They wanted the Old Testament in Greek. Rome divided Palestine in 3 parts. In the Old Testament, it is the northern tribes and the southern tribes, Israel and Judah. But in the New Testament, you have that same place divided in 3 because of the Roman Empire. There you have a map. Galilee, Samaria, and Judea. Religious shifts. Pharisees. During the time between the Old and New Testament, there was a time where the Jewish people were persecuted. And then they realized we need to preserve Judaism, their religion. And the way they did that, many groups formed to say we need to preserve who we are. So many religious groups were formed during the time between the Old and New Testament. The Pharisees were very conservative. In the time of Jesus, there were more than 6,000 Pharisees. Sadducees, they were more liberal. They did not believe in the resurrection of angels. So they were all Jewish people. Scribes, they were lay people who studied the law of Moses. They had seen Jesus as a threat to the peace of Rome. That's why they didn't like Jesus, because it was so peaceful. And Jesus caused turmoil because people followed him. Zealots, they were the political activists. They followed the faith of the Pharisees, but were totally against Roman domination. They wanted to get rid of the Roman Empire. Then the Essenes, they were mystics who lived out in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So they isolated themselves. So these were the different Jewish groups that were formed between the Old and New Testament. And when Jesus appeared on the scene, you had the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, zealots, and the Essenes. Language shifts: Old Testament, Hebrew; New Testament, Greek. But before we get to the Greek, a few books in the Bible, and we have them there, Ezra and some in Daniel, were written in Aramaic. That is a dialect of Hebrew. So when they went into exile, they spoke Hebrew. But in Babylon, they learned a new dialect of Hebrew, Aramaic. So when they returned, they spoke Aramaic. And that was the language of Jesus. Jesus spoke Aramaic. It's very close to Hebrew. The New Testament, Greek. So those are the diacal shifts. Political shifts, cultural, geographical, religious, language shifts. So that was God's way to prepare the world scene, the stage, in such a way that the gospel could spread quickly. It was just amazing. Any questions? Jackie?
Is the Aramaic language used anywhere today? Is the Aramaic language used anywhere today?
I believe so. The Aramaic language is used today. I can be wrong, but the Hebrew language is in use. But it's very modern. You have biblical Hebrew, and then you have the modern Hebrew. But I think, Jackie, we need to do a Google search on that one as well. New Testament. The 27 books that make up the New Testament were nearly all written before the end of AD 100. The 27 books can be grouped the following way. You have the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Acts of the Apostles, the letters of Paul, the general letters, and John's visions. That will be the book of Revelation. But I cover that in detail in the devotional book. Any questions? So, it means, if you look on the screen and on your it will be covered on page 33 as well. God is faithful to his covenant in creating a community of believers, a family of faith, and we call it today the church. God is faithful. The Messiah was born, and Matthew 1, chapter 1 starts with the genealogy of Jesus. And where does it start with? What man? Abraham. To remind us, God has been faithful. Started with Abraham. God will never turn his back on us. I just want to show you on the map. I just want to show you on this map how the blocks work. Just to get a picture give a picture for you. The first block is prehistory. We cannot really show it on the map. We didn't know when it happened. Creation and the fall and the flood. The second block starts with is the patriarchs and slavery. So God called Abram. He moved all the way north. That's the modern Iraq. All the way and then south to Israel. And he had one son with the name of Isaac. And Isaac had a son, Jacob. And Jacob had many sons. One of them ended up in Egypt. And what was his name? Joseph. How many years did the Israelites stay in Egypt? 400 years. And that brings us to the end of block number 2. And then block number 3 starts with Exodus and conquest. And who's the main person there? Who took them out of slavery? Moses. So that's block number 3. Moses took them out. And what is the next block? They entered the promised land. Did they have any kings? No. So it's block number 4. It's the time of the judges. And what's the next time? The next block, 5.
United Kingdom.
United Kingdom. United Kingdom. Not Britain. What's the next block?
Divided.
The divided kingdom. So this United Kingdom divide in two. And then the northern tribes were taken into exile by the Assyrians in 722 BC. The southern tribes were taken into exile by the Babylonians in 586. Following the Babylonians, who became the world power? Starts with a P. The Persians. And they allowed them to come back. So it was the divided kingdom going into exile, in exile, and then they return back. And what's the next block? How many years of silence? 400 years of silence. And we had the decor shifts. God creating the world seen in such a way when Jesus was born, the gospel just could spread quickly. I'd like to hand you over now to your facilitator.